In this video, not only are we cooking, but tasting and learning about the history of the best desserts from every decade. Back in 1904, a 23-year-old pharmacist by the name of David Evans Strickler had the idea of trying to get college kids to come to his pharmacy. So he came up with this genius recipe for what we know today as the banana split. If you're wondering why pharmacies even had desserts, well, back then they operated soda bars in addition to their drug business. Doctors also thought that carbonated beverages were medicinal, like Coke, Dr. Pepper, and even root beer were developed as medicinal tonics. Also, fun fact, the first ever published recipe of a banana split was featured in a magazine specifically made for pharmacists called The Spatula. The recipe featured all the classic toppings that we still use today, and what you're seeing right now is the original 1904 recipe exactly the way it was written. Brian's our first decade banana split.
It's pretty crazy that the original banana split recipe was featured in a pharmacy magazine.
Yeah, that is
for
crazy.
Doctors.
Also, barbers used to be like dentists. Wow. I wish I could say this brings back memories, but I wasn't alive in the 1900s, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's still a classic to this day. I mean, it's pretty cool that we got to experience the first one.
Throughout this video, you're gonna see dessert dishes that kind of don't exist anymore unless you make it at home. Let's go check out what's in the next decade.
Let's go to 1910.
During the 1910s, World War I broke out. Many cookbooks from that era featured fruit-flavored cakes because dried fruits and fresh fruits were generally cheaper. This led many people to celebrate holidays, family gatherings, and even birthdays with fruitcakes. They had to do the best with what they had, you know? And since it was World War I, these fruitcakes would often be sent to the war front from families to boost morale. Also, the recipe we're making today was featured in this cookbook right here, the Rumford Complete Cookbook. And to be honest, it was pretty easy to make, and I'm actually quite excited to try it. Brian, we are now in the 1910s.
Look at the cake, it looks vintage, right?
Oh yeah. And fruitcakes were super popular in this decade. They were relatively cheap to buy. It's World War I, a lot of families would bake the cakes and send it out to soldiers to obviously boost their morale. So this was layered with that coconut cream filling with orange zest in it.
Let's give it a try. Cheers, man.
Ooh. Very, very citrusy.
Tastes really good, but it did come out really dry.
Yeah, I think it was all about the buttercream and the cake itself. It wasn't really about how moist do we make it. That wasn't a thing they even thought about. The journey's not over. Let's head over to the next decade.
Let's go.
This is an Eskimo pie. This is actually the first ever mass-produced ice cream bar in America. They were invented by a school teacher and part-time candy store owner in the 1920s. Legend has it, he saw a boy struggling to decide between ice cream and a chocolate bar in his candy shop. He wondered what would happen if I combined the two. And boom, the first ever ice cream bar was invented. The patent for the ice cream bar was licensed to dozens of other ice cream makers in the country, and thanks to that, ice cream bars became widely popular in the 20s. It was literally the birth of the frozen dessert industry in the US. Another famous dessert from the 20s was Jell-O. Gelatin is one of the most popular desserts in history, but it wasn't until Jell-O started manufacturing it to the public in the 1890s that it took off. By the 1920s, Jell-O was one of the top desserts in the country thanks to their partnership with Kewpie. Kewpies were these dolls that kids loved, but became highly collectible for women in the 20s. In hindsight, those dolls looked absolutely creepy, but they made Jell-O a national sensation, and that we have to thank them for. Right in front of us, the original box, the very first ice cream bar ever made in America.
It's kind of crazy. On the back of this, it says, our Eskimo pie has been found equivalent in food value to approximately 1 chicken sandwich, 2 boiled eggs, and then 6 ounces of boiled potatoes or 1 pound of carrots. Let your children eat all the Eskimo pies they want. It's good for them.
And we pop this, and in here, we have 2 Eskimo pies. What a classic dessert. Why did it take them so long to come up with this idea?
$1 million idea right here.
This is a billion-dollar idea. Yeah. Just think about the Klondike bar. All right, Brian, the Eskimo pies weren't the only famous desserts at the time. It was also the classic Jell-O.
Yeah, and just gelatin desserts in general, but the brand Jell-O that we know today.
Yeah.
was founded in 1890, but in the 20s, they started to go viral, whatever that meant.
Let's go ahead and hop back. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
It sucks because Jell-O is so connected to like hospital food now.
For me, this is like the classic like cheap dessert.
It is good because of the gelatin in it. The collagen in Jell-O is actually pretty healthy for you. But Brian, we're just getting started. Let's hop over to our next decade. We're now in the 1930s and times were tough in the Great Depression. During this era, eggs, butter, and milk were just way too expensive for the average person. So housewives started to get creative. They made cakes that used alternatives like vinegar and baking soda to help the batter rise without eggs. These recipes were passed around at community churches and gatherings, and it wasn't until the 1960s that we saw an actual published recipe for the cake, which is what I'm making right now. All right, Brian, we're now in the 1930s, and in front of us, the wacky cake.
Also known as the Depression cake because it was popular during the Depression era when financially times were really rough. This recipe wasn't published until like the 1960s because in the 30s it was just passed around from like housewives.
Let's go ahead and try this. Cheers, buddy. It tastes like a delicious chocolate.
Really good.
It's actually pretty moist for the most part. Like you remember 1910 when we had that orange cake?
Yeah.
How dry it was? I don't know why it was called wacky cake. It was more like a delicious cake to me. If I was in the 30s, I'd call it a dilly cake.
A what?
A dilly cake.
The heck does that mean?
Delicious cake. All right, well, let's see what the next decade.
1940s, let's go.
So back in the 1930s, there was this lady, Ruth Wakefield, who ran this place called the Toll House Inn. One day in 1938, she was making a batch of chocolate cookies, but she ran out of baker's chocolate. You know, the one that kind of melts and blends into the dough. Instead of scraping the whole thing, she chopped up Nestle semi-sweet chocolate bar and tossed the chunks in, figuring, they'll melt. But they didn't, and bits stayed in the dough. The chocolate chip cookie was officially born. Her customers loved them so much that Nestle approached her for an endorsement. That's why you see Toll House branding on the chocolate chip bags at the grocery store today. And that's because it pays tribute to the Toll House Inn, the hotel that her and her husband owned. Crazy, right? Anyway, when America entered World War II, she modified the recipe to exclude sugar because of war rationing. And that recipe was printed on this ad. Housewives all across America were encouraged to send batches of chocolate chip cookies to soldiers overseas to boost morale. Thanks to this, chocolate chip cookies were the most popular dessert of that era. Everyone around the world already knows it's the chocolate chip cookie. So freaking cool. And it came from basically a hotel, the Toll House Inn.
Chocolate chip cookies.
The OG recipe.
Let's go.
Oh my goodness. The chopped nuts and crunchy. This has that classic flavor to it. Nothing beats the chocolate chip cookie. And thank you to Toll House Inn. Without them, we wouldn't be ever having chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and hop over to the 50s. For the 50s, we had to go with an American classic, Betty Crocker's upside down pineapple cake. This cake was made all across the country in the 50s, and that's thanks to it being featured in Betty Crocker's 1951 picture cookbook. Here's also a fun fact. Did you know that Betty Crocker isn't even a real person? All those pictures you see at the grocery store are actually just genius marketing by General Mills. And because of that, I feel ripped off and cheated on. I always thought she was real. Anyways, let's give her upside down pineapple cake a taste. In front of us is what I consider a wacky cake. This is something I haven't seen. You've seen this? You've had this?
Dude, yeah.
Wow.
That was like the era of appliances and kitchen gadgets, and a lot of innovation was happening in home cooking.
Yeah. Cheers. First time. This is a crazy dish. The pineapple has the juice in it. The sugar that we put kind of caramelized with the butter. I feel like we're kind of getting better. Let's just go ahead and move on to the 60s.
Let's go, dude.
Now we're in the 60s. Pillsbury holds an annual bake-off contest where home bakers submit their original recipes. So in 1966, Ella Helfrich took second place in the contest with her famous tunnel of fudge cake that featured a gooey chocolate core. And because of that cake, it set off the chocolate bun cake trend. And although she didn't win, it was the most popular recipe from that year's bake-off. And it even even got the cover of Pillsbury's annual cookbook. I mean, I have no idea why she didn't win. But honestly, guys, when I was making this, the batter was super thick and I was very skeptical, but it turned out pretty good. Now let's just see if it tastes any good.
Okay, so we're in 1960. The bundt cake was invented. There was like literally a tunnel of oozing fudge for us.
Ooh.
It's a thick. Let's do it. Oh. That's so good.
Holy moly, dude. You have so many different textures that are going on right now. You have the fudge on top with the crispy chopped nuts in there. I believe that she should have won.
It's a new shape. The bundt cake is still around to this day.
Very legendary, but let's see how legendary the 1970s.
The 1970s were all about fun colors and having a great time. This is the era in which the Watergate salad was born. The Watergate salad wasn't actually named after the Nixon scandal, but somewhere along the way, a Chicago food editor decided the dish needed a name that fit the times, and Watergate salad stuck. It was a super easy, no-bake option for a dessert to bring to an Easter party or even Thanksgiving. Plus, the green color made it look very festive.
We're now in 1970, and in front of us, the Watergate salad.
It's like the most 70s thing ever.
Cheers, buddy.
Like,
Whoa, this is crazy.
it's so good. The pistachio flavor is so intense.
Visually, I was not looking forward to this dish. Why does it look green? Kind of looks like vomit. But after trying it, I'm surprised more people aren't making this and having it. I'm gonna take this to my Christmas dinner this year. But let's see if I'm gonna take the 1980s.
The 1980s was a special time if you were a kid. Not only did the 80s birth video games, it also marked a turn in the way teenagers and kids snacked. With tons of junk food options and fun treats, there was probably no era where kids were more sugar high than the 80s. Dirt cakes first appeared in the early 1980s, especially in the Midwest, where potlucks and quirky desserts were a big deal. It was one of those no-bake recipes that spread through word of mouth, community cookbooks, and PTA meetings. You know, the kind of thing your mom's best friend swore was so easy and the kids would love it. So let's give it a try.
Welcome to the 1980s, where we have a dirt cake.
Oh, it looks like dirt. A recipe that was born out of just like the junk food era.
I know.
Just from like television and movies. Like it was pizza, soda, and chips all the time.
I bet you to some people this is super nostalgic. Dude, I bet you as a kid, how many people fought over the worm? Like, I want a worm. Whoa, this is definitely a child's meal. Not my favorite as far as flavor goes. My mouth is like stuck together because of the sweetness.
I think a kid would be hyped to eat this, but
Yeah.
not for me, man.
Probably one of the more worst decades as
Yeah,
far as flavor
for sure.
goes. Let's go into the 1990s.
If you grew up in the 90s, you know a McFlurry was the ultimate treat. Although there were other versions like M&M's and Twix, we all know Oreo was king. Then that creamy soft serve blended with Oreo crumbs.
Let me do one M&M and one Oreo.
Even today, a McFlurry takes me straight back to Saturday morning cartoons, blockbuster nights, and simpler times.
Brian, we've made it to 1990.
Dude, this isn't the McFlurry I grew up with. What is this?
I
crap?
know, the quality got worse. We used to have them in nice
Bro.
quality plastic cups with that dome lid on top of it. And look at this, they give us flaps.
Guys, this is a crisis.
Cheers, buddy. Back to the 90s.
Oh my God, that is so good, bro. That is the most nostalgic flavor of all time for me.
Yeah, and it still has a nostalgic taste, but definitely not the look. 90s was a different era, man. It was,
Everything sucks, but no,
let's go ahead and get out of the 90s and hit up the new millennium.
The 2000s were the blog era of the internet, and people who had popular blogs during this time were the trendsetters in culture. One of those trendsetters was Angie Dudley, who called herself, or her blog rather, Bakerella. Bakerella.com was her blog, and in 2008, she posted about these little cake balls on a stick covered in chocolate and decorated to look like everything from superheroes to cartoon characters. And they went completely viral. Moms made them for kids' birthday parties and family get-togethers. It was massive. Hell, even Starbucks put it on their menu, which they still sell to this day.
Brian, we are now in the 2000s, and in front of us is what we know as cake pops.
Cake pops, man. These are very popular in the 2000 era. I mean,
Yeah.
the kids love it, and you can decorate it however you'd like.
Yeah, it's genius. Cheers. Such a fantastic combination. In the 2000s, this was absolutely huge. Let's go ahead and head to the 2010s.
The 2010s was the rise of social media, and that's why I picked my recipe, the Oreo cake with a chocolate bar on top. I watched so many different videos and kind of figured, hey, I can make a cake using only 4 ingredients that's super simple to make and everyone can make it. When I made this, it went completely viral.
Brian, we've made it to 2010, and here in front of us is Oreo cake with chocolate bar on top. It's my first ever viral recipe on YouTube itself.
Today, we're gonna be making the world's easiest chocolate cake ever, and it actually only takes 4 ingredients.
I was able to share this to millions and millions of people. Let's go ahead and eat these.
Wow, that is decadent, man.
Yeah, obviously it's hard to say what is the most popular dessert of this decade.
This is your contribution, bro, and we're doing it. This is your channel. Great job. I think it tastes delicious.
Thank you.
It's so easy to make. You should make it.
This video has been so cool, going through the history of desserts, knowing where we started from to where we've ended. I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you like it, thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.